Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. We're going to give everybody just 1 minute to get connected to make sure we have as many attendees as we can. Thank you so much for your patience. All right, I think we're ready to go live. Hello and welcome to the webinar on the Pan-African Trials, addressing seed availability across 14 countries and 50 plus locations with 40 plus varieties. This webinar is presented by the Soybean Innovation Lab, a USAID Feed the Future initiative to promote soybean production and utilization in sub-Saharan Africa, in collaboration with the International Institute for Tropical Agriculture and Agricultural Diversification Activity Project, USAID Malawi's flagship agriculture program. My name is Ashley Negley, and I am a program specialist for the Soybean Innovation Lab. I will be helping moderate your webinar today. We have registrants from 38 different countries and panelists located in 3 different countries for today's webinar. I'm so excited you could be here with us today. Before we begin, I would like to give everyone a quick overview of the GoToWebinar software, which you can use to engage with other panelists, ask questions, and access webinar resources. On your GoToWebinar control panel, you will see a questions pane. Please type in your questions as they arise. We will collect all of your questions and address as many as possible during our Q&A session at the end of our webinar. Questions that are not answered during the webinar will receive a written response after the webinar has concluded. Also, there is a handouts pane on your GoToWebinar control panel. Access this to receive materials relevant to the soybean African variety trials, the Pan-African soybean variety trials. I will give a quick introduction of today's presenters and launch a poll before turning things over to the panelists. Our first poll today we would like to know more about our audience. So we are asking you, what is the most common source of seed in your region or area? Saved on farm, received from the government, received from a private company, or from a neighbor or relative? I give the audience just a few seconds to answer this question. We're just trying to get a sense of what your resources look like back at home. Looks like 34% of participants have voted. Thanks so much for submitting those answers, guys. I'm going to give you just a few more seconds. I will be closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. So just to do a quick breakdown of the results, looks like 28% of our audience has saved seed on farm, 12% is receiving seed from the government, 56% from a private company, and 4% from a neighbor or relative. Thanks so much for submitting those answers. Please stay tuned because we have 3 more polls throughout today's webinar, and we'd love to get your feedback. Now I will transition into a quick introduction of our panelists. Today we are fortunate to have 5 panelists with us today to discuss the Pan-African soybean variety trials. Dr. Godfree Chigeza is the head soybean breeder for the Regional Hub for Southern Africa, working at the International Institute for Tropical Agriculture. Godfree is stationed in Zambia and works closely with SIL on the Pan-African trials. He will be giving an overview of the trials as well as outlining the goals. Dr. Brian Diers is a professor of soybean breeding in the Department of Crop Sciences at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Brian is principal investigator of the Soybean Innovation Lab Plant Breeding and Germplasm Research Area, Managed Research Area 1. He will be presenting on the variety test results from Malawi, Cameroon, Rwanda, and Uganda. Florence Kamwana is a legume agronomist with the Department of Agricultural Research Services, otherwise known as Diers, under the Ministry of Agriculture, Irrigation, and Water Development. Florence is located in Lilongwe, Malawi, and is a valued collaborator in the Pan-African trials. She will be discussing the on-farm trials and the variety release process. Dr. Elizabeth Sibale is the Deputy Chief Party with the Agricultural Diversification activity based in Malawi. Elizabeth will discuss how private-public partnerships are addressing seed availability. And Dr. Michele da Fonseca Santos is a program manager working on the Pan-African trials. Michele, along with the rest of the SIL administration team, is based in Urbana, Illinois. Michele will inform the audience about how to get involved in the Pan-African trials. Thank you so much for participating in our poll. Stay tuned, there'll be more polls spread throughout. Also, don't forget you can access the reports related to the Pan-African trials in the handouts pane, and today's webinar is being recorded. So a link to the recording will be sent to you after the webinar. Now I'd like to turn things over to Godfree, who will be giving you an overview of the trials and outlining the goals of the project.
Good afternoon, colleagues in America. Good morning. In Africa, good afternoon. I would like to give an overview of the Pan-African soybean trials past. Next slide. Next slide. The Pan-African soybean trials actually is a bridge that links quality soybean varieties with African farmers. We do have a number of elite varieties being developed by breeders, but there is a disconnection on how do we get this seeds to the farmers. So the Pan-African variety trials is actually a link, it's a bridge between the elite soybean varieties and the farmers. So our goal is actually to move those soybean varieties to the farmers. Next slide. Next slide.
Godfrey, I've switched the slides, but sometimes with the different connectivity rates that everyone has, it takes just a minute. So it looks like about 98% of our audience can see that this slide is transitioned.
Ashley, can I continue?
Of course. Can you see the next slide, Godfrey?
Yes. Okay. The Pan-African variety trials is like we actually defining, having a well-defined variety testing and release and registration roadmap. This actually adds discipline to chaos in variety testing and release. It's also a visible and a transparent process. It also eliminates the critical errors and oversight. And also, this is actually have discovered that this is a faster way of releasing varieties in countries which do not have soybean breeding programs. So the Pan-African variety trials is actually a way of actually accelerating variety release in countries where we don't have breeding programs. Next slide. So the organizations involved in the Pan-African variety trials are the Soybean Innovation Lab, the private sector partners like the commercial farmers, IITA, the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture, which actually works closely with the national partners and the seed companies. We also have the Syngenta Foundation for Sustainable Agriculture and AATF as partners. So this partnership is actually aim is to deliver increased genetic gain and diversity in the farmers' fields through partnership. So the idea is actually to work together as a team to deliver varieties to the farmers in Africa. Next slide. Next slide. How do we do it? We do have trialing sites across Africa. It's an African proverb which says we do have sites in Ghana, we do have sites in Nigeria, Cameroon, Rwanda, Zambia, Zimbabwe, and we also have sites in Benin, sites in Sudan, in Ethiopia, Uganda, Kenya, Malawi, and Mozambique. So in total, we do have 14 countries participating in the Pan-African variety trials, and we have over 60 sites at the present moment. Next slide. In terms of our germplasm, we actually do what we call global germplasm leverage. We take germplasm across agroclimate conditions. We do have germplasm coming from the US. So these are actually the early maturing varieties. And you also have germplasm coming from Colombia. Germplasm coming from Colombia, these are the late maturing varieties. And also germplasm coming from Brazil are the late maturing varieties. We also do have germplasm coming as far as Australia. These are actually the medium maturing varieties, which are mainly drought-tolerant materials. We also have varieties developed in Africa. Varieties are developed in Ethiopia, varieties developed in Ghana, varieties developed in Kenya, and also varieties developed by IITA and the seed companies like Seedcorp. Next slide. So the Pan-African variety trial processes, it actually starts with the identification of partners, private and public sector. And then after that, we identify the number of locations where we want to test the trials. And then we actually get the geographic coordinate of those materials. And then we also identify the seed suppliers, whom I've already mentioned. And then we define the end release. And because some of the varieties you've got breeders' rights, we have to do a material transfer agreement to negotiate with the breeders to bring those varieties to the trialing schedule. So we need to have those varieties, breeders accepting to say, yes, their varieties can be trialed in the different countries. We do the seed packaging at one place. All the seeds actually packaged in Zambia, and then they're sent to all the different countries. With that, we also provide a trialing guide or a protocol on how to do the trials. And then we also do training, the pre-planting training, which also include the soil sampling. And then from there, once the trial is planted, we also do field days. I will talk more about the field days as we go. But the most important things are the data collection and then the grain sampling. And also we analyze that data and then we write the reports. And then we actually recommend which varieties should be released in which countries. Next slide. Next slide.
Godfrey, if you could keep talking with your presentation, I think everything on my end looks like we're good. Let me know if you can't see things, but I think you can just keep presenting through the slide transition and trust that it's going to catch up.
Okay, the way we actually do this variety distribution is that, say, for 2018, we distributed varieties in Cameroon, Rwanda, Uganda, Sudan, Malawi, Mozambique, and Zambia. In total, we actually distributed 73 varieties in 8 countries. And in Cameroon, we had 42 varieties. In Rwanda, 27 varieties. In Uganda, 35. In Sudan, 40. And in Malawi, Zambia, Zimbabwe, we had 30 varieties each. So the varieties you see colored in yellow are varieties, the total number of varieties. And the one with the white background are those varieties which are common to 2 countries. So that actually helps us to identify varieties which can actually perform, say, in 2 countries. This is very important for seed companies because if we have one variety which can perform in 2 countries, the seed companies are able to market those varieties in 2 countries. It also is useful when we think about the harmonization of the seed regulations, in that if you can register varieties in 2 countries, say in the SADC region, you can actually sell that variety in all the other countries. So it really helps us in terms of seed harmonization to test the varieties in same varieties in 2 or more countries. Next slide. We are also involved in communication with the stakeholders. We actually do this through the annual field days. We do in-country annual field days during, towards when the plant matures. We actually invite farmers, different stakeholders, to come and see the varieties in the field, so that they can actually appreciate or select the varieties we think they are better for them, or we think they are likely to be used by the different stakeholders or by farmers in their region. So this is quite a very important part of our event, the annual field days. We actually conduct this so that we can actually have feedback from the farmers, so that we can also use that information to channel it back in the breeding program. Next slide. Okay, I would like to acknowledge the IITA breeding team and also the DAS Malawi SeedCorp team, the national partners, the SIL team. They're actually doing a tremendous job. It's quite a lot of work to do to actually send varieties in different countries, more than 14 countries, and then to coordinate all these, to collect the data and send it back to our collaborators, the SIL team in the USA. So I would like to thank the partners in Africa and also the partners in the USA. I would also like to thank our funders, the Soybean Innovation Lab, AITF, IITA, Syngenta, and the USAID. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Godfrey. That was a lot of great information. And thank you everyone for your patience with some of our technical difficulties as we get everybody's connectivity levels are different. So we're getting our slide transitions, but it's a little bit slow today. So thanks for your cooperation with that. I'm going to launch the second poll. We would like to know some more information from our participants. So what soybean trait is the most important for you? Yield, maturity, plant height, lodging, or seed weight? Again, what soybean trait is most important for you? Yield, maturity, plant height, lodging, or seed weight? I give you just a few more seconds to submit your answers. All right, guys, I'm going to close the poll in 3, 2, 1. All right, just giving you a quick overview that 90% of respondents said yield was the most important trait, with 10% citing maturity. So looks like we're at a pretty good consensus there. Don't forget that you can submit your questions in the question pane of GoToWebinar. We'll be addressing those after today's panelists present. Also, you can access reports related to the Pan-African trials in the handouts pane of the webinar. And today's webinar is being recorded and a link will be sent out afterwards. Now I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Brian Diers, who will be discussing the variety test results. Take it away, Brian.
So Godfrey gave lots of good information about the tests that are being grown in lots of different countries. And so what I'm going to talk about are results that we have received from collaborators and some of the analyses we've done and what some of the results look like. So what I'm going to be talking about are results from tests in Malawi, both in the winter and the summer season, as well as tests in Cameroon, Rwanda, and Uganda. Within each country, the tests were grown from anywhere from 9 to 3 locations, and the tests were planted from December 2017 to October 2018. And any given test that I'm going to talk about had anywhere from 24 to 40 entries. In this presentation, what I'm going to be talking about the results from these tests, but I need to acknowledge that I really didn't do any of the work. I've helped with some of the organization, but I need to stress that we need to acknowledge the collaborators who did the work to make these tests possible. And I need to acknowledge once again the efforts of Godfrey and his team at IITA, who prepared the seed and shipped the seed to all of the collaborators. But we also need to acknowledge the collaborators on the ground who actually did the hard work of growing the trials. So for example, in Malawi, I'll be talking about results that were collected from trials grown by Diers, Alliance One Tobacco Limited, Limby Leaf Tobacco Company, Agris, and also Good Nature Agro. They grew the Malawi trial, although they are actually located in Zambia. So they're located right across the border from Malawi and Zambia, but they were growing the Malawi trial. In Cameroon, I need to acknowledge that work was done by the Institute of Agricultural Research for Development. In Uganda, it was grown by Makerere University and Agilis Partners. And in Rwanda, the trials were grown by the Rwanda Agriculture Board. The primary trait that we're interested in, which was shown by the last poll, is grain yield, because we need to improve grain yield so that farmers can produce soybeans profitably. What this figure shows is the median and the range of yields across all lines in the test at each field location, so that we're able to compare how lines performed at these different locations. So what this is called a box plot. And with this box plot, what we have on the y-axis is yields in tons per hectare. And then each column on this box plot shows the results from a different location. So they basically have arranged locations from these 4 different testing seasons and country, or 5 different testing countries and seasons. So for example, the first column with the box plot results would be Rubona in Rwanda. And this shows that the median yield in this test is about 0.7 tons per hectare. The middle 50% of the lines, which is shown by that box, range from 1.1 to 0.6 tons per hectare. And the range of the lines in this location vary from about 1.5 to 0.4 tons per hectare. What you can see is that the median yields for the different environments range generally from about 2 to 0.5 tons per hectare, with the highest yields in locations in Malawi and Zambia. We had individual lines within locations that had yields over 4 tons per hectare, which is very good yields. Within tests, the highest yielding lines typically yielded about 2 times greater than the lowest yielding lines. And this demonstrates how important it is for growers to identify the best variety to grow in these tests, because you can show that if you choose the variety correctly, you can get much higher yield than if you don't have the right variety. It's difficult to show the results of all the lines and tests in a slide. So what I'm showing are results from the highest yielding 15 lines in this test, as well as in other tests that I'll go through. I know these slides are busy and you won't have time to really look at all the results carefully, but as Ashley mentioned already, you can download these tables from the webinar website, as well as if you go to the SIL website, you can also download the results there. So if you want to look at this later, these tables are all available. So this first table shows the Malawi summer test 2017 to 2018. So what you can see in this test, the top yielding line is TXG 1991-22F, which was developed by IITA. And this was followed by a line developed by Seedco. Both of these lines are highlighted in yellow. The local checks are the number 3 and number 4 highest yielding lines in the test, which are highlighted in green. You can see that the highest yielding line is not significantly higher yielding than the checks, but it is earlier maturing, which is a trait that's desired by growers. And Florence will talk later about how how she's working on getting these high yielding lines released so that farmers in Malawi will have more opportunities for having high yielding varieties. So within this group of the top 15 highest yielding lines, there are lines from 4 different organizations that are not significantly different in yield. So it shows that there's a lot of opportunities out there to source varieties from different organizations. Because soybean is grown primarily for the protein and oil in the seed, what we're doing is we're actually getting seed tested that were harvested from these variety tests for both the protein and oil concentration. And what's happening is we're taking seed samples from these that's harvested from these tests, and they're being shipped to the University of Missouri, where they're doing this composition analysis. So this table shows the results from the Malawi summer test, and what you can see is that there's significant variation in protein and oil concentration, with protein concentrations ranging from 42 to 36%. So this information is going to be very valuable for processors. As they think about what varieties they may want to contract farmers to grow, they can look at this and decide, you know, are we emphasizing protein? And if that's the case, they can request for farmers to grow these higher protein varieties. Another thing is that we're now collecting this data from tests grown in all the different countries. And what this should do is give us a good overview of protein and oil composition across Africa, which is something that hasn't been done in the past. The next slide shows the top 15 lines in the Malawi winter test. This test was grown during the dry winter period in Malawi under irrigation, and we grew this test at the request of some of the tobacco companies in Malawi because they have irrigation capacity that's not used during this period. So once again, the line TGX 1991-22F highlighted in yellow was the highest yielding line. And if you remember, this was also the highest yielding line in the summer test. So that shows that this line does very well across diverse conditions in Malawi and provides further evidence that it should be released. We also entered some early maturing varieties from the US because we thought that they might be adapted to some of these cooler conditions in Malawi during their winter. And what you can see is actually the second and third highest yielding lines in this test were from the University of Missouri. We're going to need to repeat these tests to verify that these results are repeatable. The next table shows the results from Rwanda. The highest yielding line in this test is TGX 2001-10DM, which was also developed by IITA. This line has very large seed, which is another trait that lots of farmers like to see. The lines in the test that are highlighted in blue are Maxoy lines developed by Makerere University, and they performed very well in this test. You can see a lot of the best yielding lines were these Maxoy lines, which isn't surprising considering they were developed for adaptation in Uganda, which is very close to Malawi. In the Uganda test, the Maxoy lines highlighted in blue from Makerere University also performed very well, and they were the top yielding lines. Shows that, again, the Makerere University program is doing an excellent job of developing varieties for the Ugandan environment. Other lines that did very well, which are highlighted in green, are seed code lines. Again, they performed very well in this test. Finally, in the Cameroon test, lines from Seedco, which are highlighted in yellow, performed the best, followed by lines from Makerere University, highlighted in blue. Interestingly, lines from Ghana, highlighted in green, performed well in Cameroon, which isn't completely surprising given that both countries are in West Africa. Something that is of interest is to determine how varieties perform across countries. And this is something that Godfree talked about, is that we want to identify varieties that perform well in countries. So what I've done is I've taken the mean across locations in each country, and I've organized the varieties based on the yields. So the highest yielding one on top, lowest on the bottom. And what I've done is I've highlighted the highest yielding line in one color, for example, in Rwanda, it's highlighted in yellow. And then I'm highlighting in the same color in other countries. So we can see how the highest yielding line in one country performs in other countries. What you can see is that for Rwanda, TGX 200110DM, highlighted in yellow, is the highest yielding line. In Uganda, it was a 10th. Malawi summer test, it was 15th, and Cameroon, it was 11th. So this shows that this line is reasonably well adapted across countries. So it was in the upper 1/2 for yield in all the countries it was tested. In contrast, you can look at Maxoy 4N, which did well in Uganda. It was the #1 line, but it performed poorly in Malawi. So again, it shows that this line can do well in Uganda, but not well in Malawi. As mentioned previously, TGX 1991-22F was a highest yielding line in both the Malawi summer and winter trials, but it didn't do that well in other locations. So again, it's important for us to look at how these lines are doing across environments. And this is something we're going to be doing more research on to see whether or not we can better predict how lines will do in various environments. Next slide. So in conclusion, from these tests, lines were identified that performed well in tests and outperformed local checks in some countries. TGX 1991-22F was the highest yielding line in both tests in Malawi, and Diers is registering it. Maxoy lines performed very well in both Rwanda and Uganda. And there's a significant amount of genotype by environment interaction. More work is really needed to understand this and better predict how lines will perform in different environments. The results, though, in Rwanda and Uganda were fairly highly correlated. So again, something you expect for two countries that are right next to each other. And test results from more countries are going to be available soon.
Oh, you're muted, Ashley.
Oh, thank you. Thanks so much, Brian. That's so much good information. And as he mentioned earlier, there's lots of good information nested in those reports that are located in your handout section. So don't forget to take a look at those. I'm back to launch another poll to get some more information on our audience. So we would like to know, what is the average soybean yield in your region or area? 0 to 500 kilograms per hectare, 500 to 1,000 kilograms per hectare, 1,000 to 2,000 kilograms per hectare, or greater than 2,000 kilograms per hectare. I'll give you just a few more seconds to submit those answers. Again, what is the average soybean yield in your region or area? All right, I'll be closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. All right, I'm going to share those responses really quickly so you can see how you compare to everyone else. Looks like 6% of our responses cited 0 to 500 kilograms per hectare, 47% cited 500 to 1,000 kilograms per hectare, 19% list 1,000 to 2,000 kilograms per hectare, and 28% greater than 2,000 kilograms per hectare. Thanks so much for participating in our polls, and don't forget, we have another poll coming up. And a quick reminder, today's webinar is being recorded. A link to that recording will be sent out after the webinar. You can access those reports that Brian has been referring to in the handouts pane of GoToWebinar, And please continue to submit those questions in the questions pane of GoToWebinar. We'll be addressing those after our panelists conclude today. Don't miss out on your chance to participate in the Q&A section. I would now like to turn things over to Florence, who's excited to share information with you on the on-farm trials and variety release process. Florence, the floor is all yours.
Hello. Hello, everyone. I'm Florence Kamwana from Malawi, Diers. I'm going to present on the on-farm results. As Brian has indicated, he was presenting on the on-station trials. So after we selected some of the high-yielding varieties, this season, 2018-2019, we took some promising lines, and then we planted in, they were planted in 7 sites. That's across Malawi. So in those sites, 3 farmers are used as replicates. Farmers participated from planting up to harvest. We made sure that all farmers, even the nearby farmers, should be able to participate during planting as well as harvesting. I can say all activities farmers were involved. These on-farm trials will run for 2 seasons or 3 seasons, and then this will aid us into the registration process. Next slide. Results from the on-station trial, as Brian indicated, there were 15 highest yielding lines. So out of those, we selected 5 best lines that were taken and evaluated under farmers' conditions. And let me mention it here that some of the lines were also taken from our national program. So in total, we had 8 lines that were taken on farmers' field. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah, so this table, I'm going to talk about the selected varieties that were that farmers selected during the field days. One of the variety which was preferred by the farmers was TGX 1995 5FA. That's in Salima. But as you can see, the same line, which is TGX 1991, was also among the selected ones. So in summary, I can say during the field days across all the 7 sites, the lines that you are seeing on this table, they are the ones that were mostly preferred by the farmers. And they were like, when are we going to have these varieties? So the farmers, they also had some reasons why they had to select all those lines. So my next slides, I'll just give some reasons why the farmers were selecting those lines. So the farmers, some farmers were like, due to the large seeded size of those varieties, so most of the farmers preferred that. And also the higher number of pods per plant, most of the farmers prefer that it will translate to higher yield. And also on the ALA maturity. And let me mention it here that the same TG, the same line which is preferred like 22F, it's also LA, it's in the group of LA maturing. So the farmers prefer the LA maturity lines because like here in Malawi, there's a tendency of mid-season dry spell. So the farmers were like, if we have this early maturing varieties, it means even if we have the mid-season dry spell, but at least they will have something, they will harvest something at the end. And like if they have those other varieties which maybe take long to mature, so they preferred early maturing ones. And then some of the reasons were the lines, they had a marketable quality, hence it is easy to sell. And also the bigger leaves, which will be translated to good. And then my last slide is about the variety release process here it does. Having successfully evaluated the materials on the station, and then you have the on-farm evaluation. After that, then you have to, after evaluating the varieties across all the sites that you have, maybe 7 or more, then you are required to have that maybe for 3 seasons, and then 2 or 3 seasons on farm evaluation. Then if you are successful, then that will lead to the proposal development. So the scientists, after the proposal development, the scientists will present the findings to the secretariat here it does, which is called Technology Dissemination Team and the Technology Clearing Committee. So if the committee have seen the results and they are comfortable to say, no, you can release, everything is set, you have your own farm data, you have your own station data, and maybe other parameters which they normally like, then you are free to go. You can now start processing for the registration, and then maybe the variety can be taken to the farmers, or maybe commercialization, and maybe other things. But also let me mention it here that to say before that, the technology clearing committee, they also want about maybe 50 kilograms of the seed. So if we are releasing a certain line, we need to have multiplied somewhere, so that when we are proposing for release, we should have enough seed in store. Yeah, so in summary, that's what I can say, and that's the end of my presentation. It was a brief one. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for all your hard work on the variety release process and for sharing that information with us, Florence. I've popped back in because we're going to do our 4th and final poll. So what is the main limitation? Oh, let me launch it. What is the main limitation to increased soybean production in your region or area? Lack of improved seeds, lack of mechanization, lack of markets, lack of inputs, or lack of credit? Again, what is the main limitation to increased soybean production in your region or area? Lack of improved seeds, lack of mechanization, lack of markets, lack of inputs, or lack of credit? Thanks so much for those of you who have cast your votes. Please submit those as soon as possible. I'm going to give you just a few more seconds to submit those answers. Again, what is the main limitation to increased soybean production in your region or area? All right, I will be closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. And just to take a quick look at those answers, looks like 40% of you think lack of improved seeds is the biggest limitation, while 14% cite lack of mechanization, 24% are dealing with lack of markets, 16% are dealing with lack of inputs, including fertilizer and inoculum. We've really been enjoying the interactive element of the polls today, and we hope you have too. This information will guide the content development for future webinars and other resources related to the Pan-African trials. Your feedback really does make a difference. Thank you so much for your poll responses throughout the webinar today. Also, don't forget, the webinar is being recorded, and you will have access to the link to the recording after the webinar has concluded. And don't forget to submit those questions in the questions pane of GoToWebinar and access your handouts in the handouts pane. I will now turn things over to Elizabeth, who will tell you more about public-private partnerships in the Pan-African trials.
Dr. Sibale, we can't see or hear you, so if you can turn on your webcam and unmute your microphone. Great.
Yeah, can you see me now?
Sure
Yes, we
can.
Okay, I'm going to highlight how AgDiv, that's the Agricultural Diversification activity, one of the Feed the Future projects, has facilitated public-private partnership in an attempt to make seed available on the market as fast as possible. You know, we realized seed as a key constraint to agricultural productivity and diversification in Malawi, and that prompted us to seek support from various players who have the technical knowledge and the capacity to move things to get seed on the market. And this is how AgDiv partnered with the Soybean Innovation Lab to collaborate research on soybeans in Malawi. Next slide, please. And apparently, as we are doing this, there's also a growing interest coming from the tobacco industry. As you know, tobacco prices have been going down in the past years because of the low demand for tobacco worldwide on the world market. So the tobacco growers and the suppliers are looking at other crops which can replace tobacco or supplement tobacco. And soybeans has been identified as one of the crops which can supplement or replace tobacco. And as a result of this, they have been looking for suitable varieties for agro-processing, because out there, the agro-processing industry is producing at the, maybe, you know, most of them at low capacity because the product is not there. So the private or commercial growers are looking at varieties which can give them optimum yields, as well as varieties which are the qualities which the industry is looking for. Next slide, please. So to quickly identify the good varieties, AgDiv partnered with SIL to tap in their technical capacity in soybean research and technologies, which has partnered with IITA and Diers to conduct the Pan-African variety trials as described by Godfree, Brian, and Florence. For us, we also facilitated partnership for Diers and SIL to partner with the tobacco growers to test these varieties on their farms. These are commercial farms, and they're doing it at their own cost. For the past 2 years, which included summer and winter, they have run these trials as described by the former presenters. Next slide, please. Okay, as described by Brian, there are very good varieties which are coming up, and the private sector is very excited to get these varieties on the market. So in April, the ministry hosted a conference which went through the processes in the ideal processes where we can get maybe varieties from private breeders for commercial use in Malawi. This is in respect to plant breeders' rights and licensing. So this AgDiv participated in this conference, but we are also supporting the ministry through Diers to get on with these varieties. We hope that in the next month or so, as Florence has already alluded, these varieties will be released, and the varieties will be taken up by commercial companies in partnership with the private breeders, and hopefully they'll have all the respective agreements made in Malawi. And we are hopeful that in the next year or so, these varieties can be taken up by the commercial sector, and they can provide the required inputs to agro-processors in Malawi. Thank you, and I'll turn up to
Elizabeth. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your great presentation. So, hi everyone. Today I'll talk a little about how to get involved with the Pan-African trials. So there are many ways that you can get involved with us. So you can work with us as a seed supplier. So you can send your lines to be tested in the Pan-African trials. You can come as a trial operator. So you really actually plant the trials. And also as an off-taker, if you are interested about licensed or registered varieties that come out from the Pan-African variety trials. So if you are interested, please contact me using this email address in the PowerPoint, and I will be more than happy to work with you in the next steps. So just to show a little bit the expansion of the Pan-African trials, when we started in 2015-17, we worked with 3 countries and 14 locations. In 2018, we had a total of 10 countries, so we have 7 more and 55 locations. And now, in the middle of 2019, we have 72 locations and a total of 14 countries. So we really expanded a lot, and the year is still in the middle, so we have more coming, more locations to be planted in Cameroon, in Malawi, in Zimbabwe, in Zambia, and also all the countries that we are working with. We are set up agreements with Angola, and also lots of discussions coming to have the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So we are expanding, and we will be very happy having you working with us. So if you get involved as a seed suppliers, I'm gonna explain a little what SIL will provide and what you will provide to us. So SIL will provide to you the seed shipment from your country to the locations where the lines will be planted, so we will pay for it. We will provide to you the performance data, so all the locations where your line is going to be tested, you have the data back. The oil and protein concentration data, like Brian just showed to us. Extension reports, like the ones you can find the handouts here of our webinar. Webinars like these ones that will talk about the Pan-African trials, but also more specific things like soils and the other topics that you are interested about. And also field days, where you can go to the field and actually see how your line is developing in different countries. And what you provide. So you provide the lines to be tested. We would like to know any kind of description that you have. So what is the growth habit? What is the maturity of that line? Because this will support us or make a decision on what line is going to be planted in different locations. We also receive from you the material transfer agreement. So we have all the rights to use your lines and seed increase. So if you send the lines to us, we will plant, and then the next season, if you are still interested in working with us, I will contact you and let you know, okay, we'll plant this location. Can you send me 20 kilos of seed? How many locations you would like to plant? So this is just an example of some lines that we are planting the Pan-African trials. So they come from Ethiopia, Malawi, Nigeria, Uganda, Zambia, many locations like Godfree showed them. And we send it like entry list, like this is an example one. And we really will choose the lines based on on the description that you sent to us. Okay, if you join the PAVT trials as a trial operator, SIL will provide to you the lines to be tested, like it isn't released, a pre-planned training. So depending on the location, the pre-planned training can be online. So it is provided normally by Brian and also Glenn Hartman, who is the plant pathologist. We will provide to you a trial protocol, a disease guide, and a data collection guide. So you have all these documents to help you on data collection. We provide you soil analysis, so you sample the soil, send to the US, and you will pay for the analysis, and you send you the discussion about the analysis back. We provide you field days, data analysis, so like you got a comments, you send the data, we analyze your data, we write the reports, and we provide to you. Oil and protein concentration, the webinars. What you will provide for the Pan-African trials is going to be the trial management, so it's your responsibility, everything related to land, labor, suppliers. You provide to us the GPS coordinates, so you use the GPS coordinates to make a decision, the planting list that you send to you. The data collection, right? We depend on the data coming from your hand. Soil sampling and the harvest grain, because the harvest grain you use a sample to do the protein and the oil analysis. So this is an example of a layout of our trials. So we work with 3 replicates, and our rows is 5 meters longer, and in between rows we have a 1 meter LA. So we kind of organize ours in the same kind of layout, and this is an example of 35 entries, just to give you a brief summary on how we work. And this is an example of the report you'll find many today that we have downloaded, but we normally try to show summary of how we implemented the trials. We have a map with the locations. We have details of the planted date, harvest date, the GPS coordinates. We have the weather data, and also you will have it like in some of the soil results, and also the final data. And the next slide, please. Yeah, you'll find all the final data across locations, and we also make sure to add to the last page the seed suppliers. So if you are interested, you can also contact the seed suppliers to know more about their line. And if you are interested to be off-takers, you get from SIL the trial data, so you can use the data for registration release process, and we will support you with licensing and also royalty in terms of examples and the contracting agreement examples too. And so we have the webinar that is very informative, and also field days where you can go to the field and actually meet the trial operators, discuss about the data, and actually meet the seed suppliers if you're interested about their line to register. And what you provide is compliance with licensing, royalty, and contracting agreement between off-taker and variety owner, and the royalty payment if applicable. So this is a little bit what I would like to share with you for how to get involved with the Pan-African trials. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Michelle. So much informative information. We'd love for you guys to get involved, and Michelle is definitely the best point of contact for that. We're going to transition over into our Q&A section, and we're getting close to the end of our webinar, but we'd love for you to stick around. We'll finally be addressing those questions that you've submitted throughout the webinar in the questions pane. And this is just a quick reminder to our panelists to try to keep your responses brief so we can address as many questions as possible. And I'd like to turn things over to Dr. Peter Goldsmith, Director of the Soybean Innovation Lab, who will be moderating the Q&A session. Take it away, Pete.
Yeah, thanks, Ashley. Wow, what a great webinar. Great jobs, panelists. Pat yourselves on the back. Really nicely done. We have a ton of great questions. We're only going to get to a few because time is short. As Ashley mentioned, we'll go till 15 past the hour. So we'll take a few questions. The panelists will try to be brief. We have questions for everyone on the panel, so we'll rotate around as we go. First question for Godfree comes from a couple of people. a person from an organization called Two Blades, Diana Horvath, and Stephanie Zeiss of Malawi GIZ are talking about additional seed varietal characteristics that weren't in the poll or varietal characteristics you're looking at. As Michele said, we do test for protein in oil, but what about disease and other attributes among the varieties? Are we testing for those?
Yes, we are actually testing for most of the agronomic traits which the farmers actually consider good for that environment. So we do evaluate for diseases. Like the past 2 years, we have been having rust in Southern Africa. So we do actually work with the pathologist to do evaluation of diseases, foliar diseases with pathologists. These were actually supposed to have been presented by Brian, but because of time, he only showed the yield for the varieties. But we do actually evaluate a number of traits, including diseases, including the seed size, including the, in some cases, we actually look at the nodulation of the materials, actually the varieties, to see whether some of the materials nodulate, because the smallholder farmers in Africa, they also like self-nodulating soybean varieties. So we do actually take a number of traits.
Thanks, Godfrey. Excellent. The next question is for Florence, coming from Mary Ohlenberger from the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science. Mary is asking about, and you can only speak obviously to Malawi, we have lots of countries, but in Malawi, what varieties or what's the process to take varieties on farm and what are on station or on formal trialing with our private sector partners? How do you decide that?
Florence, you need to unmute your microphone, please.
Okay, let's see. Oops, you may have hit wrong button there. Let's see if we can get her back. You there, Florence? Oh, your microphone. We don't hear you. We see you, but don't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, very good.
All right, can you repeat the question again?
Yeah, so Mary is asking, and just speaking about Malawi, she's asking, are trials held in research stations or on farm? And how do you ensure that a range of soil types and field conditions are represented in the trials? Because Malawi has, depending on the year, 9, 10 locations. So how do you look at soil types, varied locations, and on farm versus on station?
Okay, of course, on that one, normally we consider like across sites results. For example, if we have soil results for Chigeza, that's on station, but it cannot be the same. Like maybe if we get another results from the maybe Chitara or maybe other research station. So normally when we are having the results or when we are considering the variety, sometimes we don't consider the soil type because each and every area they have their own like specific soil type. Maybe Elizabeth can come in maybe to help on that one, but normally it's specific, it's area specific, I can say.
Thanks, Florence. The locations are varied across the country, north to south. Malawi is a north-south as well as an elevation difference country, so there is good variety there. The report gives the various locations. There are soil tests at each location, so there's definitely a lot of detail. Let me switch over to a question for Elizabeth. This one comes from Harun Marithi, who's with IITA in Tanzania. And Harun asked a good question about how do you follow up the variety release process? You talked about public-private partnerships and varietal release in your talk. How many varieties have been released so far, or how many, because it's new in Malawi, how many do you think are planned for release?
Okay, how many varieties we have released in Malawi? Florence would have answered that question, but I know that there are some private companies who are selling soybean. Sidco is one of them. They are selling their own brands in Malawi, bred by their own breeders. The Ministry of Agriculture, through the Department of Research, also have some public varieties, which state companies have taken up bulking and selling on the market. In terms of public, for the varieties which will be coming out of the Pan-African variety trials, what we see as AgDiv, because we are trying to facilitate or fast-tracking availability of this seed on the market. And the model which we are looking at is linking the breeders and the private sector. These are commercial farmers who are willing to grow those varieties for off-takers whom they have already identified. So they'll be producing this seed under license from the private breeders or breeders, whoever comes with the good variety. They will follow all the laws of Malawi, including the plant breeders' rights and licensing. And what we feel that the breeder will partner with the commercial sector. They will produce or bag that variety and market it in Malawi. That is because as of now, we don't have that kind of partnership. And that is why we have been having problems having quality seed on the market. I think that's how I can answer it in brief. Maybe Peter can add on, or Florence, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, no, that's great, Elizabeth. Thanks so much. I want to get some of these questions out there. This one for Michele, there was a question from Patrice Hakizimana, who's with USAID in Rwanda. And Patrice is asking particularly about Rwanda, and about his question specifically was, why are soybean varieties very low in Rwanda compared to other countries? So where is Rwanda in the Pan-African trial process?
Yeah, from the first year that the data we are showing, 2018, we tested 24 lines, and this was due to the number of lines that the companies we were working they could handle. So they gave us a limit on the number of lines they could take. Also, we worked with early maturity lines, so we selected from the lines we had available what was early, and also they decided to start first with public lines, line developed for public institution. So, and then they will start switch to private. They have more variety of lines available for the farmers and seed companies. This is the main reason.
Thanks, Michele. Thanks so much. Next question for Brian comes from Hailu at USAID Washington, and he specifically, let me get the question up here, is asking about yield in Rwanda and Uganda. He asks, grain yields in Rwanda and Uganda seem to be much lower than Southern Africa, countries like Malawi and Zambia. What could be the reason for low yield?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't on the ground in these countries when the trials were grown, so maybe people, if there's anyone on the webinar who is from those countries, could also speak to this. As far as I know, they were having some issues with drought when these trials were grown. So that's probably a big part of the explanation. Beyond that, I honestly don't know. And we need to talk to our collaborators there to get more information about that.
And you mentioned you looked at between country differences, and do you look also at within country differences as well in varietal selection?
Yeah, so for example, what I did was looked at the correlation of how the different lines did, let's say within Rwanda, within Uganda, and if I correlated the lines in common between the two countries, the correlation for lines at locations between the two countries was as high as within the countries, which suggests that, you know, we see pretty similar performance of lines in the two countries, which makes sense. They're both relatively small countries next to each other, and they've got fairly similar growing environments.
Right. Super. And we have time for one last question, and then we will respond to all the questions at the conclusion of the webinar. We'll write everyone who sent in a question and give them a response from each from the correct panelists. So don't worry, we will follow up. But the last question is for Godfree about harmonization in Southern Africa. This question comes from Joe Cortez at C&H Seeds LLC in the U.S. and Golden Hove with the Southern African Trade and Investment Hub. And they're asking specifically, and I'll use Joe's, they're asking similar questions. Are you or will you take advantage of the USAID funded harmonization of seed regulation in SADC, SADC acronym, for regional varietal release and registration? So can you talk about regional varietal release and harmonization in Southern Africa?
Yes, to some extent, we are taking advantage of that. Especially the materials we're evaluating in Zambia, Zimbabwe, Malawi, and Mozambique. We are actually sort of taking advantage of that. You will see that 90% of the varieties we're evaluating in those countries are actually common. So what you want is actually to also have a discussion with the USAID program, which is actually leading the seed harmonization in SADC. So that's actually a very good question, and this is why I actually showed some of the common varieties, which are actually between countries or among countries.
Excellent. Hey, thanks so much. Thanks everyone on the panel. I'm going to throw it back to Ashley, and she'll conclude the webinar.
Hey, thanks so much. Okay, I think I'm back now. Thanks so much to our panelists for your time and all your great information you shared today. We're so grateful you were able to be with us. Thanks so much to all of our audience for participating. We had a great webinar today, and it wouldn't have been possible without you. This concludes the Pan-African Trials webinar, and we appreciate your participation. If we did not have the opportunity to address your question, as Pete said, we'll be communicating with you after the webinar to provide a written response. Today's webinar has been recorded, and a link to the recording will be sent out to you in a follow-up email, along with a link to
Oh, Ashley, I don't hear you. Panelists, can you hear Ashley?
You muted yourself.
Okay, she's not muted, but she, I think we lost her audio, so I will chime in. I think Ashley just wanted to conclude by saying thank you, and that an exit survey will pop up for you all to complete when you leave the webinar. We would really appreciate your feedback on the exit survey. It's very short, multiple choice, but this helps us improve webinars for the future and helps us keep learning. So thanks everyone for your participation today, and have a good evening, afternoon, morning, wherever you are. Take care.